Movement, method, mastery, memory. These four elements of body and mind are the labors we celebrate this afternoon. A story and a struggle that travels from Africa to the Americas is the movement that bridges us. A self-study and practice that we rehearse and cultivate is the method that makes us. A courage to fail and fail and fail, and yet to prosper, sustains the mastery that is the fruit of our strivings. An intuition and infinite reverb is the memory we call upon and share that binds us beyond time. We are communing this afternoon in striving and purpose, responding to the call of movement, method, mastery, and memory. Good afternoon to all. My name is Kali Aset Amen, and I'm the Assistant Director of the James Weldon Johnson Institute for the Study of Race and Difference here at Emory University. We are so very pleased to bring this event to you on behalf of our director and entire staff. So welcome to Textures of the Diaspora. We have many people to thank for helping to make this event possible, and I want to begin by thanking our Emory co-sponsors, the Center for Creativity and Arts, the Department of Spanish and Portuguese, and of course, the Michael C. Carlos Museum. In my experience over the years, the best work, bearing the greatest results, happens through relationship, creating alliances, sharing resources, building agreement and mutual respect. And I'm pleased to say these principles were very much at the center of the planning process for this event, which is the result of a collaboration, as you see, between the James Weldon Johnson Institute, Veterans of Hope, and the ceremony, music and events. In particular, I want to recognize the committed efforts over many years of Dr. Rachel Harding in her work with Candomblé temple communities in Brazil. We'll be hearing more about and from her later in the program. And the vision and talent of social practice artist Euneika Rogers-Sipp, who is also moderating our panel conversation and who I have the privilege of introducing in just a moment. First, I want to briefly mention that the mission of the James Weldon Johnson Institute is to support scholarship and teaching that helps us better analyze and understand our racialized world. And what is required of us in this work, particularly in our engagement of African diasporic experience and cultural memory, is that we liberate our conceptual options and expand the boundaries of what constitutes meaningful knowledge. Black feminist theorist Patricia Hill Collins asserts the necessity of producing new forms of knowledge that allow people of color to define their own reality. She urges that we embrace new ways of assessing truth by creating room for people to speak about the world in ways that reflect their direct experiences of it. Today, we place at the center of our inquiry the knowledge of our elders, that vast font which flows deeper and wider than any statistical analysis, any survey, any textual decomposition. It's a knowledge that comes from listening and living, reclaiming and retelling, repeating and innovating that which came before. In this task of enlarging the lens through which we examine identity and community, we are pleased to have Euneika Rogers-Sipp of the ceremony, music and events, who who has really led the curation of this event in the context of her work as a social practice artist. So without further ado, Euneika Rogers-Sipp is the founder of several organizations and initiatives in the fields of art, conservation, culture, and design education. Now, she has a very long list of accomplishments, but the brevity of this bio does not do her justice, I must say. Euneika began her career in design as a social entrepreneur in 1990 with a group of apparel industry activists called No Logo of Oxfam International in London, England, where she was a student studying fashion design. Returning to the United States in 1993, she spent over 20 years working across multiple disciplines in film, fashion, fine art, and music, and her works have been seen on MTV, BET, Entertainment Weekly, you name it. Her current practice, though, is specifically purposed to end persistent poverty in African American rural hometowns by way of sustainable community and economic development. A 2016 Loeb Fellow at Harvard University's Graduate School of Design, she collaborates internationally in the design and planning of local living agricultural communities. As the founder of Sustainable Rural Regenerative Enterprises for Families, she uses unconventional community engagement platforms to connect families to regenerative forms of development, agricultural design, and rural land use planning in the Black Belt of the United States. Welcome.
Thank you, Holly, for that introduction. How's everyone doing tonight? Can you hear me? So I just want to take a few minutes to thank everyone for making this event possible. This has been a pretty intense past couple of months, planning, organizing with family, friends, and Emory University, Spelman University, the Hammons House Museum, just tons of people who we have loved and admired. My husband and I, Kevin Sept, we loved and admired over the years, and we finally have an opportunity now to bring this work full circle into this wonderful demonstration and workshop that we're going to do today. So the workshop, I think I'll talk a little bit about the workshop so you all know what you have in store. We have it set up into 3 phases. We're going to do a conversation, a very sort of informal conversation. It'll be formal, but it'll be informal. Because we want to really show you how the women have been together this week, how, reflecting on some of the conversations, some of the experiences that we've had, and sort of cooking and sharing our shared histories together, really, and I think you'll find that to be quite amazing. So we will do that for probably about 20 minutes, 25, 30 minutes, and then we'll follow up with some question and answers from you all, maybe about 15 minutes. And so we wanted to really take this first part of the session for 45 minutes, give a little break, and then for those of you who are staying for the workshop, we'll take a break for about 10 minutes, come back, and we'll get into the techniques that they will demonstrate. So I am going to introduce each presenter today individually. I'll have them come up, and then we'll get into the conversation. But I do want to, again, do the thank yous to share my thanks to Emory University, again, Dr. Iyalorixá, Amaral, for all of the work that you've done, put into this. Amanda Hellman, Elizabeth Horner, and I think that's everyone we're thinking about here.
Candy Tate.
Ah, Dr. Candy Tate. I could not forget Dr. Candy Tate. Are you here? Yeah. Well, thank you. Thank you for all the work that you've put into making this happen again. So the past 10 years, I think I'll go straight into talking about the past 10 years, my work. I started out in the late 80s as a fashion designer. I came from a very rural area, a very small town in North Carolina. My idea was that I would go abroad and I would study. I'd go to Paris, and I'd be one of the first African American women to be able to basically have my name printed on the back of people on their derrieres, and I wanted to be like Diane von Furstenberg and all those folks that I heard about. And so I didn't know that I could even be a designer. I didn't know that there was a field. Really, the only thing that I knew about the apparel manufacturing process was manufacturing plants, cotton production, agricultural farming. It was a very sort of subverted view of the industry. I was fortunate enough to receive a scholarship. I went abroad. I studied in London with the idea of getting to Paris eventually. 2 years into that process, I realized that the industry really represented a lot of what was good, but also a lot of what wasn't good. And primarily the way in which we treat our workers, the environmental processes that most people don't really think about. So I knew that I had to do something different, and that really set me on my course to social activism, social entrepreneurship, really working hard to merge the values and practices that I got really were put into me from my grandmother, my family members in New Orleans, North Carolina. So I worked to figure out how the apparel industry, which represented something that somewhat is frivolous, could be thought of as damaging, could be something that would alter people's lives, actually do some good. I started my first nonprofit when I returned back to the United States in 1993, Refashion Network. I worked really hard in Southwest Atlanta with all my artist friends, trying to work this vision and trying to come up with sustainable clothing. I say all this to say that it's been a challenging journey to finally get here 20 plus years later, knowing the realities that exist in our communities, and how hard it is for us to find decent work. But I've been inspired by the women that have worked all around me and in my community again. The past 10 years led me really to this point here, because you heard, I'm really interested in this idea of what is called persistent poverty. I didn't know that there was a thing called persistent poverty that existed primarily in the southern United States of this country. I didn't understand what my role was in that, if I had anything to do with that. But I knew agriculture was a big part of it, and so I decided to sort of shift focus and began to go deeper into the Black Belt South. Everything, pretty much all the states below the Mason-Dixon line, where the poorest communities were, majority African American. Studying myself through the women, the men, the families that I saw. Over the past 10 years, I've probably interviewed over 500 families. Over 500 families, all African American families, from Mississippi, Alabama, all throughout Georgia, Tennessee, Louisiana. With all the same stories, really. The challenges that we face to really be able to stay on the land that we've inherited since emancipation. At first, I thought it was a simple, thank you. That's what being around a magnificent mother will do for you. I thought it would be as simple as coming up with an economic model, just a program, we all can do that. We know how to sell products. We go to business school, we can create a business plan. but that doesn't really do much of an impact on systemic injustices in our communities. I've been inspired by each and every family that I've been fortunate enough to work closely to. My dream for the next 20 years, 30 years before I die would be to see these families that I've worked with be able to fully realize the freedom that was promised to them. There are lots of ways you can enter into a conversation about community economic development, justice, and fairness, but at the end of the day, it comes down to the assets, the cultural assets that we have, the gifts that we've been given, the land that we've received here in this country, and what we're able to do with it. And so, reaching out to my community, I've been fortunate enough to find people like Daniel Mentor, other artists who have done some amazing work that keep me uplifted. Daniel Mentor is an artist from Georgia. He's a friend of my husband and mine. And he does amazing Orisha paintings. When I saw his work, I had to know him, and I had to know what brought him to the point of being able to create and capture the energy of my grandmothers and all the families that I've been fortunate enough to work closely with. Those conversations led to meeting Dr. Rachel Harding and understanding this deep this deep relationship with the mother through contemplate. So this is about 2 years ago. We continue to build around this idea of the divine sacred. What is it in our families, our journeys that we share, that we can lift up, we should be lifting up, and we should be what is our responsibility as mothers? And so we thought it'd be a great idea if we bridged her work with my work, and voila, here we are today. So I just want to just go ahead and get into the introduction of our panelists. I'll start with Rachel, because Rachel is really the reason why we are here. Rachel Harding is a historian and poet who teaches at the University of Colorado, Denver. She is an Ibomi ritual elder in the Terreiro, the Cobre community, and is initiated into the Orisha Osun. Rachel is author of A Refuge in Thunder, A History of Candomblé, and co-author with her mother, Rosemary Freeman Harding, of Remnants, a memoir of spirit, activism, and mother. Dr. Rachel. Rachel, you wanted to say a few words before?
Sure. Thank you very much, Euneika. And Kamina said, I'm just very happy to be here at Emory with all of you. I want to just say something very briefly about the Veterans of Hope Project, which is one of the collaborating organizations. This is a project based out in Denver, Colorado at the Ayra School of Theology that was founded by my parents, Rosemary and Vincent Harding, about 20 years ago. And the essence of the work of that project is related very much to why we are here today. And that is to gather and share the stories of elders from communities of color and indigenous communities who have been involved in social justice activism with a spiritual grounding for at least 30 years of their lives. So that's the veterans part of it. We started our work gathering stories of Black and white folks from the Southern Freedom Movement, long form interviews of 3 to 7 hours with an emphasis on the spiritual and cultural resources for social justice, and then expanded to include the stories of elders from the Chicano rights movement, from the women's movement, from the gay and lesbian movement, from the American Indian movement. and in particular have developed what I think is an extraordinary relationship with elders from the Candomblé community, one of the central traditions of Afro-Atlantic religiosity. Those of you here may be familiar with Santeria or Lucumi of Cuba, Vodun of Haiti, Winti of Suriname, and of course our southern rural mystic traditions of African American Christianity. Well, Candomblé is part of that same circle of traditions that were created during and after the enslavement of Africans in the Americas. And we look to all of these traditions for resources to understand how to build healthy, compassionate, multiracial societies for the 21st century. Looking at the history of activists, looking at the history of ritual elders, and their personal stories, their collective stories, for how do we build societies that have room for all of us and that draw on the richness and the wisdom of all of our traditions. So I just wanted you to know a little bit about the organization that helped to bring this to be, and we are so happy to be in collaboration with the James Weldon Johnson Institute, the Ceremony Music and Events, the Carlos Museum, Spelman, and these wonderful women from Brazil who you will meet in just a moment, as well as our sister from Gee's Bend, Alabama. We're just excited, and we hope to share that excitement with you today.
Valnizia Pereira Magal is a senior priestess in the Afro-Indigenous Brazilian religion, Candomblé, and leads one of the most prominent temple communities in the state of Bahia, Brazil, the Terreiro do Cobre. In existence for over 100 years, the Terreiro do Cobre is an Ingango. To give you this region, can you pronounce it? Ingango.
I'm sorry. What is it?
Just refer to it. I don't want to fix it.
That's
And
okay.
just read it.
Oh, the Terreiro do Cobre. It's the neighborhood. It's an Engenho Velho da Federação. A neighborhood. A neighborhood that developed from the site of a former slave plantation and is recognized as an important fount of Afro-Brazilian culture and tradition in the city of Salvador. As Iyalorixá, or head ritual mother of the Terreiro do Cobre, my vow is responsible for the preservation of sacred rites, ritual music and dance, pharmacopic knowledge, and liturgical African languages that have been passed down to her for more than 7 generations. She is also a chef specializing in regional and ritual foods, and has presented her work as a culinary and ritual specialist on panels, at exhibitions, and in symposia in various cities in Brazil, as well as internationally in South Africa, Benin, Spain, Portugal, Chile, and the United States. This is my vow's 5th visit to the USA.
Vandrea's for a little less Portuguese in this one. Vandrea Amaral is an artist, event planner, and junior priestess who has been studying the rites and philosophy of Candomblé with her mother, my vow, for over 10 years. She is initiated to the Iyalorixá Ewa. This is Vandrea's first visit to the USA. Mary Margaret Pettway, born and raised in Gee's Bend, Boykin, Alabama. Mary Margaret Pettway is a 3rd-generation quilter and daughter of Lucy T. Pettway. She is a member of the Gee's Bend Quilters Collective, founded in 2003 to promote and market quilts from the community of Gee's Bend. She has taught quilting workshops throughout the Southeast and is a regular instructor at Black Gold Treasures Cultural Arts Center in Camden, Alabama. It's my pleasure to introduce Mary Margaret.
Well,
So thank you all. The first question, and anyone can answer as I make my way over, is how did you get into, who introduced you to the techniques that you use? And anyone can start.
I was forced into it. I was forced. No. It's customary in Jewish people. This craft is taught from mother to daughter, and even to the sons. Quilting is well, it's taught from the mother. You start up under the quilt. You don't start out making anything. You start up under that quilt, just like that table. You start up under it, and you work your way all the way to the honored place of sitting there and quilting with your mom. So, and I mean, it ain't easy as it sounds, it takes years. But even though I was forced, I now find pleasure in quilting. Sewing and quilting. It brings me a great peace.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon
A todas e a todos.
to all of you.
É prazer estar aqui
It's a pleasure to be here
para mostrar pouco do meu aprendizado, no que eu aprendi, das coisas que eu aprendi no terreiro de Candomblé.
to show you a little bit of the things that I learned in the Candomblé temple community.
É sempre bom passar alguma coisa que as mulheres aprendiam antigamente, talvez por não ter opção de estudar, de trabalhar, e tinham que ficar em casa fazendo alguma.
It's always good to be able to share some of what we've learned from women who perhaps because they did not have the opportunity to study or to have lucrative jobs, had worked at home and learned these skills and techniques that they passed on to us.
Meu prazer maior é estar em momento, em ambiente que eu estou me sentindo muito familiar, parecendo que todos são meus parentes, todos são pessoas que passam lá no Brasil, no meu dia a dia, no meu cotidiano.
It's wonderful for me to be here in a place where I see so many faces that remind me of people that I know at home, relatives, friends, people that I see in the street in Salvador, Bahia.
Muita gente bonita igual a mim.
Lots of beautiful people just like me.
Pois é, bem num tempo é pouco, tem muita coisa que a gente, coisa em tecido que a gente faz com a mão, porque naquele tempo nem máquina se tinha, então as mulheres tinham que aprender de alguma forma, na senzala, no fundo do quintal, cozinhando para os filhos, alguma coisa as mulheres tinham que aprender para sobreviver.
So there's so many things that we could share with you. Learning how to sew by hand, different kinds of techniques that women learned, even back in the days of the slave quarters, whether it was cooking techniques or sewing techniques, many things people learned by hand and taught to the generations who came after them.
Então as mulheres tinham que aprender com a avó, com a mãe, com a família, para fazer alguma coisa para vender.
So the women had to learn from their mothers, from their grandmothers, from their aunts, in order to learn a skill and techniques that they could use to help sustain themselves and their families.
E que hoje, nós, mulheres de candomblé, mulheres de comunidade, de quilombos, comunidades negras, fazia porque precisava para ganhar. E hoje está se perdendo essa cultura de fabricar esse vestido que eu estou vestida, foi feito por uma mulher em um terreiro de candomblé, de pedaços de tecido, de rendas e bicos.
So many of the skills that we know, that women know in Brazil, are skills that are being lost today. This dress that I'm wearing, for example, was sewn through scrap materials of white cloth, by a woman who is a part of a Candomblé community. Young people today, many young people don't know these techniques or aren't learning them in the way that we had.
Sobras de bico que as mulheres costuravam para as sinhás, para as brancas, para as madames, e sobrava as pontas de rendas, de bicos, e aí ela fazia roupas para os filhos, para a família. E hoje, infelizmente...
Desculpa.
My
memory isn't as good as it used to be. But clothes like this represent a tradition of black seamstresses during slavery and after, who would make fine clothes for the white women for whom they were forced to work or for whom they worked, and whatever little piece of cloth was left over, they would put together in this quilted kind of style for their own families, for their children and for themselves.
E hoje, infelizmente, as grandes fábricas estão costurando para as madames e tecidos que os negros pobres usavam. Está muito caro. Hoje, muito caro se fabricar renda inglesa, chilier. São costuras caras que a gente fazia e hoje não pode usar.
So today, a lot of the forms of the styles that we created, these particular kinds of lace forms, the quilted clothes, are very expensive. They're made by machines and they're sold at very high prices, prices that we ourselves can't even afford.
Ou você aprende e faz em casa, ou você não usa, porque as grandes fábricas estão contratando muitas mulheres, fazendo e vendendo caro uma arte que era do negro e do pobre.
So either you learn how to make it yourself, or you have to have a lot of money to buy from companies that contract women to make them, but then sell it for a very expensive price. And we ourselves can't afford to buy them.
A coxa de taco que ela faz.
This kind of quilting that Ms. Mary Margaret makes.
As sobras dos tecidos para cobrir as crianças, para se cobrir, porque não tinha mesmo. E hoje é um artesanato caro.
We used to do the same kind of quilting in Brazil, and we would make them out of scrap pieces of cloth to cover our children because we didn't have anything else to cover them with. And today, these kinds of quilts are very expensive even in Brazil.
Eu trouxe pontozinho simples, porque não tinha como fazer uma coisa grande, mas um ponto que a gente faz, e se compra o tecido, linho, cambraia, e se faz palas de blusa, se faz vestidos, e se vende também muito caro. Mas eu gostaria de trazer uma coisa grande, mas infelizmente não tem como.
So I brought something to share with you all today. It's called Bahia Aberta, and it's using a linen or cambray type cloth. And I'm sorry that I didn't bring a big finished piece for you to see, but you'll be able to see a small piece of my process, so I can show you how it's made.
Tá bom, obrigada. Espero que vocês gostem.
I hope that you all enjoy.
Do you want to speak to any of that, Vandrea, before we go on to the next question?
Can she see more do que você?
Obviously, we know your mom.
De pano também retalho.
Boa tarde.
Good afternoon.
É muito prazer estar aqui pela primeira vez.
It's a big pleasure for me to be here for the first time.
Na companhia da pessoa que sempre me ensinou tudo a vida inteira, que é minha mãe.
In the company of the person who taught me everything in my life.
Junto com minha avó.
Also with my grandmother.
Eu aprendi a fazer essa florzinha que a gente também fazia colcha.
I learned how to make this cloth flower that I'm going to demonstrate today and that we use on quilts.
Toalha de mesa,
tablecloths.
Eu ficava sentadinha puxando o vestido de minha avó, pedindo para ela me ajudar a fazer a flor de fuxico.
We call it fuxico, and I used to sit with my grandmother and just helping her make it, and that's how I learned how to make it.
Ela dizia, que menina abusada, toda essa menina quer fazer essa flor. Aí eu fazia, não acertava, desenfiava de novo, fazia de novo.
My grandmother used to say, oh God, what a child is getting on my nerves because all she wants to do is make this flower, take it loose, make it again, take it loose.
Mas enfim, eu aprendi com ela, com minha
But I
avó,
learned
com
from
minha
her,
mãe,
my grandmother,
fazer
my
assim,
mother.
tudo que eu faço de arte, que além dessas flores eu faço outra coisa, que a culinária também eu aprendi muito com minha avó.
All of the arts that I learned from my mother and my grandmother, and in addition to these cloth-based arts, I also cook. And my mother and grandmother did as well, or do, my mother does.
Não que minha mãe não me ensinou muita coisa, assim, claro, mas é porque eu ficava a maior parte do tempo com minha avó. Minha mãe trabalhava muito, então eu ficava a maior parte com minha avó, e é muito bom ser criado por avó.
Pois é. So my grandmother taught me most of what I know because my mother was working, and I spent a lot of time with my grandmother, and so I learned many of the skills that I have from my mother's mother.
Porque vó faz muita vontade.
And grandmothers kind of take advantage of it.
Enfim, eu trabalho também com decoração, eu decoro terreiros de candomblé, que é o meu terreiro, minha comunidade. A próxima vez eu espero poder estar mostrando como é que eu faço a decoração de meu terreiro.
Another thing that I do is decoration for the Candomblé temples for our religious festivals. And I hope maybe the next time I come, I can bring some of that work and show you how we decorate the Candomblé temples for the celebrations for the Orixás.
Eu tenho um pequeno negócio, uma loja chamada Ibeji Festas, que é de onde eu faço toda a decoração de tema de festa infantil. Inclusive, eu estou até com uma cliente aqui, que é a filha dela, que eu vou fazer a festa da Frozen.
So she said, and I also have an event planning or party planning business called Ibeji Festas. Ibeji are the child Orixás. And she said, I actually even have a client here, her daughter, Euneika's daughter. She wants me to do her 6-year-old party, her 6th birthday party.
Então, muito prazer, para mim, vou tornar RPG, é muito orgulho estar aqui com vocês. Muito obrigada mais uma vez. E vou passar um pouquinho, que é o que deu para, como minha mãe falou, trazer para a gente ensinar, que é a flor de fuxico.
So once again, I just thank you very much for welcoming me. I'm happy to be here, and I will be showing a quilted flower design that we call fuxico to anyone who's interested.
Que essa flor pode produzir tudo que a pessoa quiser, toalha de mesa, vestido, roupa, com essa flor chamada fuxico.
And Magal said just to explain that this cloth flower called fuxico could actually be used to make all kinds of things, tablecloths, quilts, clothes. She's just going to show you how to make them individually, but they can be sewn together to make other kinds of things.
Tapetes,
Even rugs and coverings for beds.
O nome é fuxico porque as mulheres não tinham o que fazer e sentavam todas e começavam a costurar e fuxicar. Aí por isso o nome é fuxico.
So this flower, quilted flower that Vandrea makes is called fuxico, which means gossip in Portuguese, because the women would get together and be making and talking and sharing stories. So the name of this technique is called gossip, fuxico.
That sounds a lot like the quilting bee, right? Which I first learned about G-spin and working through the quilting bee. The women get around the table and gossip while they quilt. So I thought I would ask a bit about your community. If you could describe your community. You described the women or how you learned, but what is life like in the community for those women and for you?
When I was a child in that community, my life was just lovely. When the 70s came and they said we were in a recession, we ain't knew nothing about that, not as children. Because they
don't want to miss anything.
Okay. That's it. As a child growing up in that community. Anyway, when the 70s came and the recession came, as a child growing up, I didn't know anything about it. Basically, everybody down there had a garden, or you had a neighbor that had a garden. You were raising a hog, or And if anybody killed a house, you know, that meat was going around far as it can go. Everybody got a little piece of stuff. So, I mean, we're still at the point of sharing during that time. Okay? Now, times have changed since I got grown. So, it's not quite as... then when they said they loved, they truly meant it. They didn't have to like you to love you, mind you. But because they were willing to feed you, that's showing their love. Okay? But they didn't have to like you because they'll see you in the street and walk right past you. Don't say a word. But I mean, you knew it was your community, you know? You knew the ones who were going to do it. But now, things are a bit different. Everybody, it used to be together as a family, and it's kind of, you know, separating now. So.
And for those of you who aren't familiar with G-Span is a very unique community in Alabama. It's just southwest 60 miles of Selma. It's 3/4 surrounded by the Alabama River. So most of the folks in G-Span are kin, related. Just about everyone has the last name Pettway. Their inheritance was close to 10,000 acres with Africa, so close to 10,000 acres as a family unit. And it's a very rare incident where you find the relatedness. And oddly enough, the county in which they're descended from, 3 counties that were from my family, or my family descended from. So it's very interesting how ancestors work and bring us together to do this work, right? So I want to talk a little bit more about G-Span in the sense of just maybe some of the social, political history that people don't know. Martin King.
I'm a sort of question and answer gal.
Okay.
Do anybody have a question they want to ask? That's the thing. Don't nobody want to know nothing? Okay. Okay. Go ahead.
So, did you say the name where you teach is the Black?
Oh, Black Belt Treasures.
And so you have a schedule, like any of us can come and do workshops there?
You can call me and tell me you want me to come up here. It doesn't make a difference. I'm a freelance operator, baby.
Black Belt Treasures, so let's talk about just a little bit, and I'd like to hear from you also about the geographical landscape, because this is actually very important in the sense of access to resources, how products, how the making actually gets to market. So Black Belt Treasures is in the county seat, right? It's in the county seat. It's across the water, right? And at a point in time, y'all had to. How did you get across to the county seat?
At a point in time, before this ferry came back in about 2000, I think, it was a drive around. It was like a 45-mile drive.
For all the resources.
G-Span is a one-way in, one-way out sort of thing. And for people that don't know, you're going to pass my house going in, you're going to pass my house going out. So, I mean, you're not saying that to scare, but I don't like intimidation, but it's just a warning. Yeah, but
you fell in love with her.
Go ahead.
Has anyone in the community had the DNA looked at to just determine, perchance, what group you may have descended from in Africa?
I actually thought about that, but now notice, I am a quilt maker, right?
Correct.
So we know I ain't buying everything, right? I'm using what I got, you know. So, and I'm just straight too cheap to pay for it. I'm sorry, but I haven't heard anybody doing it as of yet.
And that's actually interesting. I hope we'll get to a little bit of that before we have to break for the workshop, in the sense of the relatedness, the historical, the genealogy and the legacy related to the diaspora. Maybe we can speak to that. So if we could hear a bit about your community in Bahia. What's it like for the... Describe your community. Describe the geographical landscape, access to resources, etc.
Pois é, eu nasci, graças a Deus, em uma comunidade de Quilombo. Foi Quilombo o bairro que hoje não é mais, mas foi Quilombo quando o terreiro se instalou há mais de um século. Quando saiu da Barroquinha, que meus ancestrais foram para lá, era um Quilombo.
The community that I live in now was originally a Quilombo, which is a fugitive slave community. At the time that it was founded, more than 100 years ago, it was on the outskirts of the city of Salvador, Bahia, Brazil. But by now, in the contemporary moment, it's a part of the municipality of the city. It's a neighborhood in the city, but it started as a fugitive slave community.
Lugar de resistência,
it was
de
a place
militância,
of resistance, of
activism, só de negros.
And it still is that, and it's a primarily black neighborhood.
E bairro cultural, onde se aprendia tudo. De lá do bairro saíram muitos artistas de música, jogador de futebol, cantor.
It's a neighborhood with a lot of cultural richness. Many artists, musicians, soccer players, people who are connected to the cultural life of the city and the region have been born there.
Bairro muito cultural e muito cheio de espiritualidade. Que é o bairro da Bahia, em Salvador, que está concentrado a maior parte de terreiros de candomblé que vieram da África, que se instalaram na Barroquinha e depois foram para esse bairro.
It's a neighborhood that actually has the largest per capita number of candomblé terreiros, or candomblé temple communities. Again, these are the communities created by enslaved Africans and their descendants to hold on to African religious ethics, values, and practices in Brazil.
Bairro ecumênico, porque tem muitas igrejas evangélicas também e muitas igrejas católicas.
It's also an ecumenical neighborhood. There are many Catholic churches. There are also quite a few evangelical Protestant churches.
Muita cultura, muita religiosidade,
lots of culture,
muita resistência.
Lots of religiosity and lots of resistance in my neighborhood.
E muito movimento cultural, inclusive eu, dentro da minha comunidade religiosa, faço um trabalho incansável para resgate de identidade para jovens, cursos e projetos e muitas coisas.
And I, as a religious leader, am part of a number of social justice movements that are common in my neighborhood. We do projects including workshops and classes for young people, workshops in citizenship, and we develop every year a march, demonstration.
Teatro, dança, tudo que possa acrescentar na vida dos jovens, a gente faz dentro da comunidade religiosa.
We create theater, art, all kinds of cultural and artistic projects that could help support the development of our young people.
Ensino culinária, o jovem fazer comida, para quem não estudar, não tiver oportunidade de estudar, poder ser cozinheiro, poder costurar, até ensinar a lavar e gomar, a gente ensina na comunidade religiosa.
And within our religious community, young people learn how to cook, they learn how to sew, they learn even how to wash and iron clothes, and these are skills that young people can use whether or not they have formal education.
Uma das militâncias maiores que nós estamos fazendo hoje lá no Terreiro, na Bahia, é uma passeata, uma grande passeata que vai milhares de pessoas, para que o Brasil está enfrentando muita dificuldade depois do novo do novo governo, talvez igual de vocês também, do novo presidente.
So one of the major projects that we are involved with in my community, in my temple community, is this annual procession or march that I just mentioned earlier. It is in its 13th or 14th year, she'll say, and it's directed toward respect for Afro-Brazilian religions and for religious tolerance. There is an increasing problem in Brazil at the present moment of intolerance for anything that's not evangelical Protestant Christianity, and particularly for African-based religious traditions. Part of this intolerance is the political climate that is present in Brazil, which comes from the fact that they have a president who is like a twin to the guy who's in the White House right now.
Na comunidade religiosa, além de cultuarmos o espírito, ainda temos que brigar pelos direitos humanos.
So in our Candomblé community, in addition to cultivating our spiritual lives, our spiritual connection with the sacred, we also have to fight for human rights as Black people.
Saindo para as ruas para reivindicar respeito contra a intolerância religiosa, contra todo tipo de preconceito.
And our march involves not only marching for peace and for religious tolerance, respect for our traditions, but actually for respect for all kinds of differences.
Principalmente respeito às mulheres, que nós estamos enfrentando muitos problemas com violência contra as mulheres.
And one of the key elements of our work this year is fighting against violence against women, which is a very serious problem in Brazil in the contemporary moment.
Além de termos que ensinar nossos jovens, ainda temos que nos defendermos da violência, da falta de respeito contra as mulheres de todo tipo de idade, não só mulheres, crianças, idosos que são espancadas também pelos os netos que drogados que tomam dinheiro, crianças violentadas. Então é muito difícil.
So, and women of all ages experience different kinds of violence. So in addition to caring for the spiritual lives of their communities, we have to help women who, whether they are older and have to deal with the problem of young grandchildren who may be addicted to drugs or in other situations that try to take advantage of them, or young women who may experience sexual violence, or women of all ages who have to deal with the violence of their spouses or partners. We're working with the theme of the march this year of marching against violence against women.
Thank you. So that sort of is a segue into the next question. I was going to ask you, how does your spiritual practice actually inform your work? And Maval, you touched on a bit of that, but I wonder if you could speak a bit more specifically. I know by the G-spin quilters that there are particular symbols, there are particular stitches that are used, there are signs, there are colors, and there's ways in which patterns are put together that may deliver messages, right?
Esses tecidos que a senhora faz, tem alguma coisa a ver com os rituais de candomblé, ou os tecidos são usados no contexto de candomblé, no contexto religioso?
Com certeza. Até mesmo porque esses tecidos de bainha aberta, chileiro, tudo feito na mão, era o que os negros faziam na senzala. Elas vestiam aquelas roupas bonitas, mas tudo feito na mão, para fazer os rituais dentro da própria senzala. E saíram da senzala para o povo hoje, né, livres, e aí continua dos meus ancestrais, e outros, e outros, e outros. Tem muita coisa bonita, pena que a gente não tem, não tinha como, até mesmo porque é feito, costurado na mão, puxa fio, o fio da linha, depois, né? É um processo que não é rápido.
Certo.
Fica bonito depois, depois de gomado, mas é muito trabalho.
Yes, so many of the different kinds of cloths and different traditions of art, fabric work that we have in Brazil began in the context of the slave quarters, when enslaved people would take the scraps or take the cloth and make designs to beautify them that we would then use in our rituals in celebration of the African deities. Those cloths that were created, those styles that were created in the slave quarters, then went out into the larger society. So yes, there is definitely a connection. And she was just saying she has so much more that she could have brought to share and just wasn't able to.
And I was wondering, you know, if we might speak to that at all in your spiritual practice, or the spiritual practice that is prevalent in your community in Boykin, and how it may relate to the quilting tradition there.
Really and truly, I don't know. I do know that during the Underground Railroad, their work,
Essa cadeira tá pequena, tô com a coluna.
Just a regular chair.
É a idade, não é mais, não tenho mais 15 anos.
She said, I'm not 15 years old anymore. I'm back to...
Deixa, eu prefiro daquela. Aí tô a coluna, dói tudo.
My spine hurts, my whole body hurts.
Depois dos 15, né?
After 15, that's what starts happening.
Obrigada, essa melhorou. Ai, bom. Um negócio alto, pequenininho, eu gorda.
I'm fat and that thing is too skinny and high.
E cansada de costurar, de fazer comida e de fazer tudo.
Okay, I do guess that some of these are, do convey a sign, some of the quilts do convey a sign, because they were handed down from mother to daughter for generations, I would assume. I mean, in the quilt world, to me, other than all these little things that people are drawing up now, there is really, really nothing new. You've seen it before somewhere. It's been done. And so I do think some of those quilts represent something. I mean, if you got there is a quilt that's called The Pig in a Pen. Okay? And everybody down there knows that quilt. And it's just a square that's surrounded again and surrounded again, and I mean, you can keep on going with it. Okay, now, that could have meant, if you come up on a house, and then especially if there's just one in there, right? With one pig in a pen, you may need to look upstairs, or either you can hide upstairs in the loft. Who knows? So, but they were passed down from one generation to the next.
And are there particular festivals or times in the year where certain types of quilts are produced more than others, or certain colors are celebrated, etc.?
No, I don't think so. Well, as for me, I like making my tops in the summer and quilting in the fall and the winter, and early spring, before it gets hot. But that's just me. We got some people that quilt year-round, some people that sew year-round. So, I mean, that's just a personal preference.
Question. Yeah, sure.
Go ahead.
Are you able to do any formalizing of preservation of the knowledge? Meaning, are you able to pass this on to a next generation?
It is. Both my children quilt. I have a girl and a boy.
Is it something in the community that's focused on, or you just decide within your, if you will, within your family?
Well, me, see, my children, my mother, like I said, I was forced to. I really meant that. I was serious, right? So, instead of me, after my children got 12, 13 years old, instead of me, they be out and knock the hem out their pants or something like that, or pop the button out. You get a needle, a thread, and some thimbles, okay? You're going to do your own. And you're going to learn how to put up my quilt to my specifications. Okay? You're going to learn how to take it down. You're going to learn how to sew on it to stitches that meet with my approval. Okay? And that's just the way I am. Because that's the way I was trying. So, go ahead.
Yes. I wonder, is there ever any time now that communities come together? I know originally that the ladies used to come together in some kind of hall or something. I can't remember exactly what, but do they make quilts in the community?
Some women do so together. They'll have one, let's say everybody at that table quilts together. You got one top. Everybody's going to put on that one top. And then the next person may bring in a top. Everybody get together and put on that top. Me, myself, I'm a loner. I was raised by a perfectionist in the quilting world. Okay? That means I quilt alone. Because there are very few people whose stitches can suit me. Okay? I don't mean any harm, and I'm perfectly fine. I'll help you quilt, but you ain't gonna help me.
Any other way?
Go ahead.
I was just wondering, are there secrets that you just can't share with us?
About what? I will tell you whatever I want.
Maybe symbols or meanings, or is there anything that you have to be in it to know it?
I wouldn't know. I wasn't living back then when the slaves were down there. I don't know. Those were my foreparents, but I do know the patterns. I know all. Just I ain't gonna say all from line. I know most of the quilt patterns, and I know especially the ones from G's Lady.
If I could comment on that, I would say that with we've been together since 2011, 2010. So I would say that an outsider, so you know, if you've ever grown up a place and you left and you come back, you're considered an outsider, especially if it's a long time. You're considered an outsider, even if you're from the place in which you left, right? But you're really an outsider if you're not from there. Okay? So I've noticed over the years, as our relationships have grown and we've grown stronger together, and we've built our relationship, that there's more and more that I learned about, so I observe and I was getting told certain things, I didn't know what it meant, and they were making fun of me on certain occasions, I found out that later, maybe 3 years later. But I think it's the same thing with the quilting process. You're going to come in and depending on who you are and how you receive and what kind of person you are, how the community decides to, how they accept you is what you're going to be exposed to. So it's no different than any other art form, any other practice probably, right? Yeah.
It's bad when my friends shoot game at me. She don't even know what I be shooting game at.
Most of the time I do, I just can't catch it. Yeah, block it. Okay. You have a question?
Yeah, what's your favorite pattern?
I don't have a favorite, actually. I have one that I just hate for real. I hate. And I love the real cotton that they sell now. Well, it's supposed to be real cotton, but we know better, right? Okay. The one I hate is the one which you had the hook. Now that's the most hated batting, but I can quilt with any of them. I was quilting a quilt for a lady, and I noticed the bag of batting that she had bought me. On that bag, it had bamboo on it. It quilts just like the cotton. I didn't know that, but it quilt good, though. So, I mean, it's not, to me, it's not a favorite. It all depends on the quilter, and if your lining is super soft like the muslin is, everything quilt better.
Are there any more questions from the audience? I think we're sort of mixing. Okay. You just have a question? Yes.
I'm trying to. My grandmother quilted, and I have 2 of her quilts, one of which I'm afraid I didn't try to talk to you afterwards so I can get out of the doghouse. But I'm also a grower, and I've been very interested in finding out when there wasn't access to either scraps or rags. Is there a tradition that extends throughout the Black community in the diaspora that is actually taking, be it plants or natural other natural fibers, where we have the agency to make our own fabric rather than rely on that? Because I have not been able to find that, and I'm not sure if you can just point me in the right direction.
I can't say as far as there not being any material, because I promise you, my cousin went through clothes like 90 going north, okay? And by going through them, I mean holes in the knees. So at that time, my mother patched by hand. So I learned how to patch too. So you know I left a few surprises in that farm. So he had to tear them back out. But you know, once they get so many holes in them, it's just like patches on patches.
So that's a good question, and I think we can probably segue into another question. It's probably the final one before we want to break. So how are we doing on time? Okay. And maybe we can limit our response to maybe a minute each answer. About economy. Because what you were describing as a grower is sort of linking supply chain or value chain around from the grower, right? Being able to grow your own. So if you have fibers, you're growing plant fiber, then you can produce it. You're creating jobs for them.
I would imagine so.
Right, and then going so I wonder if that is actually how relevant that is in the reality, you know, of your day-to-day production, right? So where are you getting your fabric from? How much of the fabric is organic? You know, how many people that you know are of color, perhaps, in your community? It could be different, and I think it might be different. We don't know in Bahia, because it's about how much of you is reflected in this particular art form. So that's what I'm really getting at.
Okay.
She doesn't like long
now, everything about me is reflected in my art form. Because I quilt what I want to quilt. I make what I want to make. I'm kind of like my great aunt. There are two things I could not create in this world. I could not make a man. I can't make stockings. And them two things I can't make. And thing else is fair game. To get back to the question, there are a lot of donations that do come down there. There are scraps. Maybe you cut out a dress and just change your mind about it, you know, or you gave us the fabric that you cut the dress out of, and you made the dress. We get some double knit. We get some down. We run the whole gamut. There's even some linen. I mean, tablecloths, old clothes that come in boxes. I mean, this is what they send us, and look what's made out of it.
And part of what our work is linking those concepts. So Mary Margaret mentioned bamboo, and bamboo is one of the products that we're trying to work with Black farmers and farmers all over the country, really, particularly Black farmers, to begin to have Black farmers grow bamboo. And then the idea is that we would grow it, first feed ourselves, so let's grow the things that we can eat. We're doing that. Let's do it better. And then let's get into these other products, these other fibers, right? Start growing those. And then see what kind of opportunities. But that is a question of how many resources are going to be invested in the Mary Margaret and her community, right? And so that's what I was really trying to get at, is that there are lots of opportunities that come from the art form, right? And so how much do you see yourself reflected in all of those opportunities? That's really the question.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right, let me tell you something. I told you before, the 70s came, and I was a child. It was a recession. Knew nothing about it. It is the same way basically now, because what we do, we take what we have to make what we need. Okay? So, and that's the answer to that whole question.
You want to respond to that? Are there other, in terms of production, I guess the answer we really know, but Are farmers, are you relating to the farmers and the growers in your community where you're getting the cloth from that you're using to make these beautiful designs? Other.
Onde é que conseguem os tecidos?
Não, nós compramos mesmo da loja.
We buy our cloth at the stores.
Compramos. Inclusive, a maioria dos tecidos que a gente faz, Bahia aberta, são tecidos bem barato, bem simples, bem barato. Depois de pronto aqui ele fica.
Most of the cloth that we use to do the technique that I'm showing are basically cheap, inexpensive cloths. And they, once we transform them into kind of lace-like material, they can be sold for more money, but the cloth itself is basically inexpensive.
E o fuxico é a mesma coisa, são pedaços pequenos que são sobras de tecidos que a costureira faz e doa. Uma pessoa, como ela falou, faz uma roupa, sobra um pedaço de tecido, aí também dá e junta tecido. A própria comunidade religiosa faz uma roupa para o orixá e sobra aí, doa para as pessoas que costuram para o comércio, né?
So then the cloth that we make the flower shapes out of is often comes to us in the same way that Mary Margaret mentioned, in terms of people making clothes, a dress, and there's cloth left over, or it didn't quite come out like they wanted, they'll give it to us. People in the religious community may use cloth to make ritual clothes for themselves or for the orishas, and then whatever's left over will go towards the quilted designs, flower designs. So we just make use of whatever we have, and what comes to us either in donations or extras from other clothing that we made.
Mas a gente não ensina só a costurar. Na comunidade religiosa se ensina a fazer várias coisas. Porque nem todo mundo tem jeito para costura, principalmente costura na mão. Nem todo mundo tem jeito. A gente ensina a fazer comida, doces, e trança de cabelo, e penteados, e outras coisas também.
But we don't just teach fabric work or sewing in the community, because not everybody has the gift for that particular kind of work. That's why we also teach people how to cook. We teach people to bake. We teach braiding, cornrowing the hair. We teach other kinds of skills that are based in our community and that young people can use to make a living.
Eu agora estou escrevendo livro gastronômico, ensinando a fazer as comidas que eu aprendi com a minha mãe.
So my current project is actually writing a cookbook that includes recipes that I learned from my mother.
Comida inventada aqui, sobras de comida, porque na época não tinha condições, e a mesma coisa da roupa é a comida. Muitos pratos que só pobres comiam, que inventava e misturava, hoje está nos grandes restaurantes caríssimos, e que eu aprendi e vou ensinar para a comunidade.
So, de ovo, camarãozinho, pimentinha.
So some of the foods that are in my book are foods that I learned from my mother that represent the same kind of ethic as with the clothes. It's food that poor people would have access to, foods that were cheap, foods that were the leftovers of other people's, other people having the better quality meats and other things, and we take them and make something new and beautiful out of them. And as with the clothes, in many cases now in Brazil, fancy restaurants take these foods that black people created and charge exorbitant prices for them, and we can't go to those restaurants.
And so I don't want to check in on time. That's a wonderful answer. Thank you for that. And we are right at around about 5:25. We're going to break soon and reconvene at 5:45. So we have about maybe 10 more minutes of questions. So are there any other questions from the floor? Two? Yes.
So I'm still on the supply chain.
Oh, okay.
I have things that I made in the late 80s that I'm still wearing. But since the tariff opened up and let in all the cheap Chinese cloth, I've lost I mean, to sew and to put the effort into making things, it's less and less worth it because the fabric doesn't hold up. My construction techniques are good, but the fabric fades and frays, get funny little holes in it in places. And I'm wondering if that has affected this ethic that existed before of take what you have to make what you need. I can't even get anything decent.
Certainly.
Okay.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah. I got one person. I got another one working on it though. But I got one person with a quilt. If one of the squares or patches or whatever wears out, believe it or not, most quilts you can just go on top and do a whip stitch and patch that thing. Now, however, I got a baby cousin. She's about 13, 14 years old now. Within 2 years of me giving her a quilt, the back was off that thing. She wore it out. She took it everywhere she went. Her grandmother had a great idea. She got her receiving blankets. She still had them. And she sewed them together. She put a back on that quilt, and she tacked it, and she rehemmed it. That quilt is still in existence.
So this is what I love about Mary Margaret. She's going to keep it straight and narrow with you. I mean, the answer is she's not deviated from it. And clearly, it is what we deal with, what we have to deal with. I think there was one more question, but we make use of, it was a question here first, and then we can get to you. Yeah.
I was wanted to ask about how much of the community is able to remain, our generations leaving, and how we sustain ourselves.
Well, a lot of our younger people are leaving, but jobs are opening up that's as close as 2 hours away. So they ain't going too far, they be back. Yeah, because they don't miss mama cooking. A lot of young folks don't know how to cook, y'all. Huh?
Is there outside pressure to sell land, any sort of land?
You ain't gonna pressure no land on them to sell no land down there. I mean, not trying to be funny. Most people down there, their family owned the land or owns land. And if you got it, you ain't got to worry about nobody trying to get rid of it for you, because you ain't selling that. I'm not trying to be funny, but that's the way it is.
And it's the value within the community because we're fighting for Sapelo Island, we're fighting for the enclaves of Black community, and the encroachment of outside pressure.
Well, I have to speak, and I agree with you, and I have to speak some truth. My perception is a little different, and you know that. It's been different.
I'm ready to straighten it up. Now wait, let me finish now. However, the threat is ever present. There has been a lot of waterfront land that has been sold. Okay? So now, this has already happened. Right now, I don't know, it was, I think last year, it's like 39, some guy bought 39 acres up above. But, other than that, I mean, ain't nobody, not them. If you're living down there, you ain't trying to sell. I'll put it that way. Yeah.
We have a question right here. Yeah.
I actually have a comment, and I really appreciate what Mary Margaret said about quilting, because I think there's a lot of tension between the authenticity of quilting that started with Black women who did, I mean, I think the women from Brazil talked about that, women working for the mistress in the big house who did a certain technique, used a certain kind of fabric, but when she got back in the slave quarters, the fabric could be burlap sack, it could be pieced with newspaper, and quilting is I think the tension between that commercialization of it, and some of that came with this whole business about the Underground Railroad quilt codes. I grew up in Southwest Georgia, and like Mary Margaret, I didn't know anything. I guess because my parents and grandparents stayed there, we never went on sought freedom up north, but we were all quilters. And I think that polyester, there was a period in the 60s and 70s when everybody quilted polyester.
That was my first mini dress.
Communities in North Carolina, that's what the textile mills were doing. And so if you wanted fabric, you would go stand at the back door and get what was left from that. And so, but quilting, it's a process of disrupting the standard and the norm, because you're constantly taking risks, looking at what seemingly does not go together and putting it together and create something new.
That's
right. Keep somebody.
That's right.
I tell you what, it's actually a look into the quilter's mind. You know what I'm talking about.
It is.
And some of us so twisted and ain't real. We look so normal. We're twisted in a good way, however. But this is what our mind will jump from one to the other, to something. I mean, when they say literally a woman can do several things at once, she can. But I know what you're talking about. It is. But we had somebody work down there at one of the mills and sewing factory. They brought it in to us.
That's right. That's right. So we're going to wrap up now, and one final question or final comments. Final comments. One more question from the floor, and then final comments from the panel.
I have a question about the Brazilian traditions with quilting or sewing. Because I'm thinking about, as an American, the traditions with Underground Railroad, like she was just saying. Was there any type of hidden messages in Brazil?
Mensagens escondidas dentro do tecido. Mensagens escondidas dentro. Os padrões da renda. Tem algum significado?
Significado de ancestralidade, sim. Porque tem tecido que você faz até os símbolos bordados dos orixás, dos sagrados. Né? Não é só do sagrado, de candomblé, de igreja católica, se faz cruz, se faz vários símbolos através do bordado, para qualquer religião.
Certo. Yes, yes. We in the various kinds of lace and cloth work, there are often symbols, both from the Catholic tradition and of the orishas. People will often put symbols associated with the different African sacred energies into the lace work, the cloth work that they're making.
The last question.
I am more a third-generation entrepreneur, so been around the world. I have a doctorate in textiles, and I say that to ask, did you guys even know each other prior to this? Because from a business standpoint and industry, the reason why I can go to Neiman Marcus and buy that dress right now for $700 is because they took the effort to make it an industry. And I'm saying, I'm tired of hearing all this year after year after year, wherever I go, because we, the public, you've turned this into craft or art, but not an industry. And I think the masters, even their couture, they're dying. The kids don't want a part of it. Well, guess what's going to happen to your traditions? If you don't turn it into an industry, where the kids will love learning all the details, so that they can make a living and pass it down generation to generation, and keep buying that land and grow some actual green cotton. I think that's what the question was. The point is, have you guys met each other? Is there a society where you interact and turn this into an industry and keep this going and make some money on it? But, you know, it's nice to hear craft and art, but let's do something with history instead of just watch it die.
Fazer essa história.
So that's a pretty loaded question. So it's not working. Hello? Is it rapid? So that's a pretty loaded question. I think that one of the good things about the way we structure this is that we will generate conversations. We don't know who all is in the room. I'm fortunate enough to work with all kinds of people who say they want to make things different for our economic situations in persistent poverty communities. And I would hope that with our relationships, as we do more of these types of things, we learn about each other, we learn about our values, our shared values, and we begin to make commitments to one another, then we can begin to make the kind of investments in one another and for others to invest in us. But it's not just, it's all of us need to invest in each other in order for this to really be a reality. So I believe that these women are here because of their commitment to preservation, number one. They are here because of their commitment to their communities, to their families. You know, money is not, one of the things that with our work, we first make sure we understand that money is not the end-all be-all. There are many ways to value wealth, and that's where the spiritual piece of this work is about. Because if you are moving all the time about what the industry is doing, and you lose. We see that our industries are polluting, they're coming in our communities, they're bulldozing our communities. It's not necessarily the end-all be-all answer. I think we're talking about something much deeper here. I'm gonna let others respond to this with closing remarks. But I appreciate that, and I know the frustration because I did 20 years working in the fashion apparel industry and wanted the same thing. It was very angry about the perpetuation of these injustices. But we're here to work it out, and we need your help. So let's go to break after the closing remarks. Yeah? Okay.
Não, eu até entendo, e em partes eu aceito e concordo, mas tem coisas que são valores de família, e que às vezes a indústria rompe isso. Porque uma indústria não vai ensinar uma indústria, não vai pegar cada pedaço desse de renda, de tecido, e ensinar aos funcionários. Eles vão comprar peças e mais peças, e o objetivo das comunidades quilombolas, religiosas, entendeu? É ganhar sim dinheiro, ensinando, fabricando e vendendo, mas não denegrindo a natureza e nem perdendo os valores de essência que aprendemos com os nossos ancestrais.
She said almost the same thing that you were saying, that while making money, being able to sustain ourselves and our communities is important, that's not the most essential value. That the main reason we do this work and the way we do it is to pass on the ethics and the values that we learned from our ancestors. And so having an industrialized clothes where a whole bunch of cloth is brought in at once and it's, you know, standardized, that's not the same thing as what you learn by taking the scraps of what's left over and learning from parent to child or grandparent to grandchild. And learning how to do things without destroying the natural world. Those are the values that we learn in our religious communities, and we want to pass them on in our work.
On that note, thank you. Yes. Thank you.